Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some mixed media magic using the Turn the Page collection from Spellbinders. I have the dark roast binder here. This is perfect for creating little scrapbook pages. You could use them for just mixed media pages, junk journaling, whatever you want. I love the size of this binder, as well as the fact that the holes in the pages are quite unique and it makes it look really interesting to me anyways. This collection is a combination of printed papers as well as rub-ons, pre-printed die cuts, and dies, so you can create your own different elements for your pages. So that is the binder. It also comes, I think it's in black that it also comes in. I like the dark roast there. Then we have the pad of printed paper, and this has 64 pages total in there. There are duplicates. 32 of the pages are 80 pound, and then 32 of the pages are 90 pound. They are 7.5 inches by 10 inches, but you can see just by looking at the pages, you can use them for background pages for the binder, or you can cut them up and use them as different elements. There's a lot to choose from in there. We also have a package of cardstock die cuts, lots of different elements, and some of those elements are repeated from the printed paper. This is a pack of rub-ons. There are 2 different sheets there, lots of different elements that go well with the pages as well as the stamps. The stamp set there is called the Family and Friends stamp set. And then we have 2 different die cuts that I'm using. One is called Page with Flip Pocket, and the other one is called the Keepsake Capsule page. There is also more dies as well as stamps and other elements to this collection that you could also use with these that work really well with them. I chose to just pare it down just a little bit. So I took some of the printed papers and I'm using some of the page die cuts in order to cut my pages for the backgrounds of my pages. So there's 2 different pages here from the 2 different die sets. One has there's kind of a little notch detail all around the outside edges. The other one has, it almost looks like a torn notebook page on the top and the bottom of those pages. So I'm putting my dies in the corner of those printed papers. The remainder of that printed paper can easily be used for other things. I did tape those down so that they would stay exactly where I put them. And then I ran them through my die cutting machine. Now these dies are not much shorter than the length of the plates in the Spellbinders Platinum 6. So when I die cut them, I put them at a little tiny bit of an angle, but not too much, simply because we would have edges that wouldn't cut if I put them at too much of an angle. But even that slight angle does make it go through your die cutting machine just a little bit easier. So off screen, I also die cut some pages. I die cut some elements out of some retired Portobello cardstock. It coordinates with the colors in here. You could also use some Anchor or Fawn cardstock if you wanted. I wanted something that was fairly neutral, so I had a bunch of the Portobello left over and thought it would work well. I also took one of the pages and I'm just cutting up the different elements using my guillotine trimmer. Now you could easily also do this with a scissors and then just trim it down a little bit easier if you wanted. Because there's one long strip on this and it's a little bit longer than the trimmer that I was using, I kind of have cut it a little bit wonky, a little bit creatively in order to fit within the blade there. So that's why I cut it the way I did, because I chose to use a smaller trimmer for on screen. You could use a larger 12-inch trimmer. You wouldn't have to be quite as creative as I was being right there. So once we have all of these elements cut, we can start working on the first page. Now I opted to keep this fairly simple and just use the items in this collection as well as some inks to do some ink blending around the outside edges. You could also come in and add like stencils with texture paste or even stencils with just the ink if you wanted to add a little bit more pattern. There is a lot of pattern to some of these pages, so I didn't really feel that it was necessary. This first step here, I have one of those printed papers. I'm just using the rub-ons on the background. Now this here is a full sheet. I didn't want to cut it down to the individual pieces. I want it to look a little bit organic, so you can see that I'm peeling some of that backing off, using the wooden stick to rub some of them on, but they are really quite sticky. So even without rubbing all of them on, you'll see that we got a lot of rub-on on there without, like, it just sticks to that paper. So you do want to be careful if there's an area that you don't want it to stick down, you want to cut that off. I chose not to because I kind of wanted a little bit of an organic edge to it, and I didn't think I was going to be able to cut it to look as organic as I was wanting it. So once I did that first rub on, I went and I added that blue strip from that printed paper that I trimmed off, and then I added another rub on over top, and they are fairly transparent, so you can still see the first one underneath there. I also added a few of the die cuts from the printed die cut pack. Now, when I'm doing pages like this, I tend to kind of cluster the elements together. I want some open space and some elements clustered together. I'm not putting photos on these, but you certainly could. I don't have any, in my opinion, that I think work well with the style of the elements for these pages. So I just kept it fairly mixed media style. And because all of the elements in the collection coordinate with each other, I didn't have to spend any time matching elements. I just grabbed a few ink pads that I thought the colors would work well with the colors on the pages. So as I'm finishing the pages, I'm just going to put them in that album. That's where they're going in the end anyways. So we might as well utilize it while we're creating. So this stamp set I haven't used yet. So the very first thing that I do with a new stamp set is I use a white eraser on the stamping surface. It just helps to take ink just a little bit better. This only needs to be done one time. This doesn't need to be done every time you use the stamp set. And then I use a soft brush just to remove any eraser bits and clean that stamp up just a little bit. So now that whole set is going to be ready to go for working on my next pages. There is, in one of those die sets, there is a tag that has the holes in there, so you can put it within the album between the different pages. So I have that cut twice here, one out of that Portobello cardstock, one out of some Raven cardstock, and I chose to glue just around the edges. This way, at some point, if I want to tuck something in that tag, like a pocket, I can easily do that. You could also use some double-sided tape if you wanted those glued edges to be pristine and perfect. You could do that, but because we're doing something that is a little bit grungier, a little bit more mixed media style, I didn't really feel the need to do that. The die cut pieces that I glued to the front of the pocket, I made sure to only put the glue on the lower edges so that it didn't close the top of that pocket where the corner of that pink one meets the Portobello background, so we don't have that closed. It's still quite open. Then I chose one of the stamps from the stamp set and stamped the Portobello cardstock, and I did that with some ground espresso distress ink. Now I'm choosing to use some distress inks with these. You could use whatever you want with them, whatever inks you like that will match the colors. Next, I have the other page that I chose to do a torn edge on the printed paper so that we see some of the Portobello, some of that printed paper, and I'm inking it with some Victorian velvet distress ink. So this one, I'm going to glue this one down flat, but you could also glue just the whole edge, the top and the bottom, and have that as a pocket as well. The thing with these type of albums that I love is you can create some really fun pockets that make it really interactive, or you can glue everything down flat. You're really the boss of it, and you can really pick and choose exactly how you want it to look and what you want to do with it. So a lot of my little elements here are from the die cut package. But like I said earlier, some of these are also pre-printed on the printed pages. So if you don't have enough with that die cut packet, you could cut down some of those pages to create some more elements. When I'm doing my inking, sometimes I'll go direct to the paper with the pad if I want just kind of a narrower inking just right around the edges, a little bit more concentrated. And sometimes I'll use a brush if I want it to be a little bit softer. Neither one of them is right or wrong. Both work perfectly. So once again, I have another printed page here as well as one die cut from that Portobello cardstock. Again, I'm tearing the edges. I just like the look of torn edges with this style of book. I'm using some ground espresso distress ink around the outside edges of that die cut page there. I do clean off my sticky mat between the different inkings so that I don't accidentally get a color that I don't want on there on a different page. So I have a little bit more control. For this one here, I'm using the brush with the ground espresso rather than going direct to pad. I kind of alternate between the two so that we have the two different styles. And again, you could easily use a stencil and add some stenciled pattern to these backgrounds as well. But between the printed papers as well as the rub-ons and whatnot, I tried not to make it too busy. So this large blue piece here was cut down from the printed papers, and I only glued down 3 sides so that it could be used as a pocket to tuck something in. We can tuck in a note, we can tuck in another die cut or a photo or whatnot. I'm going to use the flip pocket for this page. Now it only has one flap to it that I'm gluing down. Because of the way it's created, you could put it on your page horizontally or vertically. Now I realized as soon as I put the glue on the side of the pocket that I put the glue on the wrong side. The little indent there should have been on the outside, but I just went with it. I just left it, glued it down wrong. I have another one for another page that I will be gluing down the proper way to make sure that we see that little thing on the front of the envelope. But again, things happen when you're creating, and I just decided to go with it. I could have die cut it, but I also wanted to point out that it does have a area that you can easily see that it's a pocket there. So these two pockets on this side here, we can easily put something in the side of that large one or inside of that flip pocket there. And I just tuck something into the larger one and then put it into that binder. I'm going to do another tag. This time I'm going to use some chipped sapphire distress ink around the outside edges. This one, once again, is that Portobello cardstock, but you can easily use fawn cardstock. Fawn cardstock is just a little bit lighter and a little bit brighter. This is just has a little bit more of a gray tone to it than the fawn. I'm going to use a couple more of those pre-printed die cuts, and I'm also going to stamp on the tag. Now, I love the fact that all of these elements go together really quickly and easily. You could easily add other things as well, so you don't need to just stick to this collection. You can use other elements if you want to, but it does make it fun to just create with a single collection and the elements within it, but it also is fun to pick and choose and add other elements. So I really love the fact that with something like this, you can decide what works best for you. So I chose one of the larger sentiments and stamped that with the ground espresso, and then I'm choosing one of the smaller stamps and just adding a little bit of texture to that tag around the outside edges. I started by using my Misty stamping tool with that tag, but I wanted it to be lighter than the chipped sapphire sentiment. So I ended up just going with my fingers, sticking that stamp to my fingers and then gluing it in different places so that it could be lighter in tone. I didn't want to distract from that sentiment. So once we have that done, I can add the other elements. I love this little color chart. It's a great way to just add extra colors. And you can see how most of these pages, I have several different die cuts and I just kind of cluster them together. When I do the clustering, sometimes they'll be lined up nicely and sometimes I'll have them a little bit tilted. So it really just depends on my how I'm feeling for that particular page. Neither one is right or wrong. For the peel off sheets, for the one sheet, I am cutting the individual things out before adding them to the pages so that I have a little bit of control. For that larger background one, I chose to keep that as a background and rubbing them on from there so that it had a little bit more of an organic look to it. I have, once again, a page cut from Portobello cardstock as well as printed paper. And I have the torn edge on the Portobello cardstock that I did earlier. I chose to tear the printed paper so that I would have one on top of that torn Portobello cardstock, and then the other piece can go on top of that page. You can see with the printed paper here, when we look at the back of the page, there will be some printed paper as well as the solid cardstock. Now for these pages, I'm only doing the one side of them. I'm not doing both sides of them. Some of them will have the printed paper on the back just because I chose to do the page out of that printed paper. Some of them will have that Portobello cardstock to the back, but you can easily add other elements to the back of it as well. For this one, I added a rub-on that I had cut from that one sheet that I was cutting them out of. And then I'm going to add a cluster of different of the pre-printed die cuts. Now you could also add other die cut pieces to this. The two die sets that I have also have different dies for tickets and whatnot, different shapes, different other elements that can also be added to it. I chose to just use the dies for the base pages as well as those tags. And then I also use that pocket die, but you can easily use them for other things as well. There's other elements that I don't end up using on these pages. So I chose to use some of those peel-offs on the right side of this page. You can see some of them hanging off and some even stuck to my media mat surface that I was working on. So that just gives you an idea of how sticky those peel-offs are. You definitely want to make sure that they are only being stuck to what you want them to stick to. They even stuck to my fingers. So they come off with water and a little bit of scrubbing, but it's just goes to show you how sticky those things are. So you want to make sure that you're only placing them exactly where you want them to sit and where you want them to stick to other elements. So I have another page here that I have die cut out of both the printed as well as the portobello. The reasons that I keep using them is adding that printed paper to the portobello gives the sheet or the page just a little bit more weight to it. I'm going to use the peel-offs on the left side here, and you can see that there was an area that was a little bit rigid on the bottom of the peel-off sticker sheet, so I just kind of touched it to the back of my pocket. It's a piece that we're not going to see, just so that it would have a little bit more of an organic edge to it. I'm going to put a little bit of the Victorian Velvet Distress ink around the outside edges. Now, when I was thinking about this project, I thought I was only going to be using some blacks and browns for doing my inking, but because some of those pages have the pink as well as some of them have the blues, I just thought it was fun to add some of those elements to it and have something that was a little bit different instead of just having kind of the traditional neutral palette to it. So for this flip pocket, I put the glue on the correct side, so you can see on the front of this pocket it has that little divot edge to it. Now I do end up going and covering them up with some pre-printed die cuts here. There's this woman here and I wanted her to have a torn edge to her, so I just tore the pre-printed die cut and made sure that it had a little bit more of an organic edge to it. Then I'm adding a couple of the die cuts on the inside of the pocket. Now, because that pocket is fairly loose and because it only has or it has openings on two edges, they are loose in that pocket. They're not going to stay exactly where I put them. They're going to kind of flop back and forth. So you have to be prepared for that. You could always glue down one of the edges of the pocket if you wanted the pieces to be a little bit more secure. So I have another pre-printed die cut, this time in blue, that I added to the top right corner in the back. It just looked a little bit plain, so I ended up adding something to it. And there is that finished page that I'm going to add to the binder once again. Now, these pieces are really nice and easy to put into the binder, and because we have the dies that cut the pages, you can make as many pages as you want that will fit into that binder. So I like the flexibility of that you can create as many or as few pages as you want, and you can add different elements like the tags, like the pre-printed die cuts, like the pre-printed papers, and have everything coordinate together really well. I think this type of album would be really fun with some black and white photos or sepia photos with it, with just those colors on the background of the pages, but you can really do whatever you want. This type of style leaves a lot of flexibility to what you want to do with it. You're not really stuck with what you should do or kind of the rules, if you will. So they're fun to do and they're quick to do because all of the elements coordinate together. You'll find all of the products that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I always appreciate the time that you spend watching the videos that I create. Have a fabulous day.